the Food and Drug Administration here in the U.S. Has approved a new drug to treat ADHD, which is a attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. So let me just show first. This is the diagnostic criteria for ADHD. Okay. And actually the hyperactive impulsive type diagnosis, because that's what we're talking about. Squirms when seated or fidgets with feet and hands. Marked restlessness that is difficult to control. Appears to be driven by a motor or is often on the go. Lacks ability to play and engage in leisure activities in a quiet manner. Incapable of staying seated in class. Overly talkative. And it goes on. When we were teaching, I occasionally, probably at least once every quarter that I had a new group of students, sometimes more than that, I'd have some very smart young male student come to me having failed to turn something in on time and ashamed would explain to me that he had ADHD. And I started to say to these smart young men, of course that's the diagnosis. You're a smart young man. Like it became predictable. And that does not mean and I actually feel like this is a really good map for trans. Like I believe that there is something at the edges that is real, and that there are people who actually will benefit from some kind of intervention. I don't know that intervention exists yet for ADHD. I don't think it's this new drug, and I don't think it's the old drugs and all of that. But I do think that there is a real thing. And like with trans, and possibly for some of the very same profit motive reasons by the pharmaceuticals, it has become this huge thing in which the vast majority of parents who think that they are only caring for their children are trying to take care of their children, and it certainly makes their jobs easier and the teachers' jobs easier if instead of a classroom in which a quarter of the kids are bouncing off the walls and having a hard time sitting down when they're told to, they're now basically drugged into quiescence. Well, that does make your job easier, doesn't it? But it also means you've drugged your children. And indeed, from the CDC, I found another line under the hyperactivity variant, which just cracked me up. This is one of the diagnostic criteria from the DSM for ADHD. Often leaves seat in situations when remaining seated is expected.
Expected, right. The problem is clearly with the child who's driven to get out of their seat.
Exactly. So I'm just, because this came up on Twitter this week, I was directed to this article that got put out, and you can put it on the screen if you like, Zach. I said, hey, look, new drugs to fix broken children. Maybe the environment in which so many children find themselves. Maybe the environment in which so many children find themselves a bad fit could be altered rather than altering the children to fit the environment. And there was a lot of good positive reaction to that, and some people who think I'm Satan.
Right.
The idea that I am against drugging children and instead think that maybe we should create school environments that are a better fit for all of our children and not just the smart and middlingly smart girls, which frankly is what school is mostly a pretty good fit for at the moment, is apparently a bridge too far.
Well, the perverse incentives here are many, and I have no doubt that many well-intentioned people have ended up allowing their children to be drugged, and the cognitive dissonance required cannot withstand the scrutiny of someone who points out that a child getting out of their seat is hardly an indication of a disorder, especially in light of the fact that seats themselves are now the root of many a disorder that we now recognize. These are not healthy objects. And
right.
What's more,
the same society that is celebrating standing desks is drugging children
because
who don't keep their butts in seats.
Right, exactly.
Right.
There's something off.
Mm-hmm.
So I would also say that the system we have built is so clearly guaranteed to produce an outcome where I agree. I don't know whether ADHD is real, but I suspect that it is. I know for sure I would have been diagnosed with it 100%. If it had been a thing when I was a kid. But I think we've got a novelty problem, which is to say, all right. Yeah, it's all good.
Wow, that's some serious cat chaos
We
there.
had a cat quake.
Thanks, Zach.
As I was saying,
they're going
is,
bonkers from being locked inside for 2 weeks.
Let's imagine for a second that they're, in the fantastically complex series of events that have to unfold in order for development to work out properly. There's something that causes a small number of children to be hyperactive and not be able to focus on something, right? Then there's a question of, okay, what do we do about this tiny percentage of children? And the answer is, oh, well, we've got a lot of drugs we can try. And then it turns out that drugs that have really powerful effects, many of them have some interaction with this because, of course, they would, right? And so you find some drug like speed that happens to do something with these kids that actually, paradoxically, as many pharmaceuticals work with children, it, calms them, right? It's effectively functioning as some kind of sedative, right? And then what happens next? Okay, you say, well, this is the drug that treats that, as if it was a specific interaction rather than just something that has massive effects across the brain, one of which happens to look positive, especially in light of the jury-rigged system in which the drug companies test whether or not something has a positive effect.
It's not a tight hypothesis-driven science, is
No,
it? No,
it's not hypothesis-driven, if you know what I mean. But then the question is, okay, once you've concluded through whatever, it's effectively a kind of idea laundering, not of the typical kind, but idea laundering where you make some drug out to be the solution to some problem that you vaguely understand or at least can recognize. Then the question is, okay, how many kids might have it? And what do you think the drug company's desired answer for that is?
I think it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a really large number. This is wildly undiagnosed.
You don't want your child to be sick, do you?
Right. Oh, what do we have to do? Well, maybe, Johnny doesn't appear to have ADHD, but maybe he's got ADHD type B, this kind of, right? So you just...
Did he stand up when you didn't want him to stand up?
I saw him standing.
I did too.
Yeah, when he was sharpening his pencil, right? And
that's what he says.
Right before he sharpened his pencil, he got out of his seat, which is one of the diagnostic characteristics. Yeah, that Johnny, he's clearly an ADHD type B.
We can fix him though. We can fix him right good for you.
We'll fix him good.
So just this article that I linked to in that tweet says, quote, and I have no idea how to pronounce this, Qelbree with a Q is apparently the name of the new drug. It's being lauded as not speed, right? Like not speed to treat your ADHD kid. Qelbree, developed by Supernus Pharmaceuticals of Rockville, Maryland, carries a warning of potential for suicidal thoughts and behavior, which occurred in fewer than 1% of volunteers in studies of the drug. Short-term studies of the drug in which we're being told that these children are going to be on it for many, many years. So that 1% is low, and I'm sorry, less than 1%. I don't know what the number is. I couldn't track it down. But you're creating suicidal ideation in a population that had none. I'm sorry, that's unacceptable.
It's unacceptable.
That's unacceptable.
1%.
Because they get out of their fucking seats.
Right. 1% is a huge number. Right. So yes,
and
this is less than
fewer.
Right, but the point is, it's not fewer than 1 in 1,000. Right. This is a large number. As you point out, it's a large number in a short period. So does that mean that as you put people on this long term, you're going to cycle all of them through suicidal ideation? Who knows?
Which we know happens with many of the other drugs. So little neuroleptics and antidepressant meds that are on the market already. And this is closer to that class of drugs biochemically than it is to speed.
And, you alluded to this in your introduction to this topic, but there is a chronic condition, undiagnosed in my opinion, in which society takes all of the problems that we are causing by inflicting novelty on people and then falsely diagnoses the person as disordered and then seeks to treat them for profit, right? It's like, it's a racket. And it's not to say that disorders don't exist. They clearly do. And of course, they exist at a higher rate than they would otherwise because people do grow up in an environment that is chemically, socially, and in every other way novel.
We probably do benefit far more from drugs than would our ancestors have had they been available because we have created so many problems with our environment.
Yeah, your ancestors, because they were a good match for their environment, would almost never have benefited from drugs. You've got the
Right.
occasional circumstance of somebody getting an infected
Yep.
limb where an antibiotic might help them or something. But
Well, and not we don't need to straw man Western medicine, right? Because it does it plenty well itself. Like as we have said here and elsewhere for decades, we have long viewed antibiotics and vaccines and surgery as the three major triumphs of Western medicine, and all of them are overused.
mhm.
And that doesn't mean that we're anti-antibiotic or anti-vaxxers or anti-surgery, except in some situations, of course, because there's some situations that don't call for antibiotics or vaccines or surgery. And there are a lot of things that would benefit from a different approach entirely.
I am anti the pretense of safety.
Mm.
Right. The fact is, all of these things have dangers, just as we know that every single drug has a lethal dose. They're all toxic. They have to be in order to function, right? For them to be physiologically interactive
Mm.
means that there is a dose at which you are doing harm. So the recognition that all of these things are unsafe, and instead of having a stupid debate over whether or not they're safe, having a debate about how unsafe are they,
Mhm.
and therefore when is it worth taking that risk and when is it not, would be well worth doing.
And both about the risk and then about the benefit. Like, what percentage of people are actually getting what level of benefit when they take this drug, and what percentage of people who take this drug are actually suffering cost, and what is the level of cost? And with something like this, or with a lot of drugs, that actually should be an entirely individual decision.
Yeah,
Vaccines is trickier.
vaccines is trickier. But even just our family has so many stories in which we have come to ultimately understand that we were exposed to risk we didn't know about. From
Yes.
the orthodontia that I had as a kid, your Achilles tendon repair, my
It wasn't the
hernia.
repair so much as the rupture that really got to me.
Well, that's the thing. Both the
No, you're right.
rupture and the repair.
No, the
show it.
surgical repair it still plagues me. What is it, 6 years later?
And it turns out that this is something that will heal on its own without surgery, right? Which was something we did not understand fully at the time.
Yeah, to be explored more later. In my case, it turns out not only was it a complete rupture, but even the sheath in which the Achilles tendon runs was ruptured. So it's not actually 100% clear in my case that it would have healed. Like when the sheath remains, but the Achilles is totally ruptured, it
repairs.
It repairs, but without the sheath to guide it, it's not clear what would happen.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll return to it another time.
Yeah.
But even just for a small family to have at least 4 instances in which yatrogenic harm, that is to say medically induced harm, is evident because of the enthusiasm of doctors and dentists.
Well, I don't think we spelled out that with regard to the Achilles rupture in the first place, it was probably, it was almost certainly affected by and maybe largely driven by the fact that I had taken a fair bit of Cipro when we were doing a lot of field work, both together and independently in our 20s. And Cipro and the entire class, I don't remember what that drug class name is right now, of drugs, is now known to cause soft tissue, specifically ligament and tendon damage.
Yep.
But
All right.
there's no indication then.
No.
Just take Cipro. If you need to get on a bus for 12 hours and you got GI stuff, you need to take Cipro.
Yep.